Practicing Qigong when you're upset or when you have strong emotions. That is going to be the topic of this episode of Chi Life. So, emotions play a really important role in our lives and in how our energy functions. Um, I've probably talked about this before. Sometimes people have an idea that emotions are in our head, but that's not an emotion, that's a thought. Emotions are something that's more than that. It often does involve our mind. Of course, it involves our mind. It involves our perception of what's going on around us, and the emotions will often be in response to that. But it's also connected to what's going on inside our body. That's what makes it an emotion. It's more visceral. Visceral meaning affecting the organs. Yeah. Because when we have different emotions, it affects the function of our organs. Our heart might beat faster, our blood vessels might dilate, we might release more bile, our stomach acid might, get more active. All these different things. It might affect our intestines. This is deeply connected to our emotions. It's stuff going on in our body, again, in response to what's around us, but it's the physical, visceral response. And it's more than just our organs. That then affects our hormones, all the different hormones we release. Classic one, oxytocin, if we're feeling love or connection, or adrenaline for excitement or fear, cortisol for stress or anger. All of these, dopamine for reward, all these different hormones as well. And so there's a lot going on inside our body. It affects our posture, it affects the way our nerve activity works. A lot going on in our body connected to different emotions. And so, of course, that's also going to affect our energy. And our energy is very much connected to what's physically happening in our body. So it's certainly affecting all that. And there's these other qualities of energy that sometimes are a little bit harder to describe and for us to categorize. It's important that we recognize that. There are parts that are very, physical, and then there are other parts that, not so easy to describe, but our emotions affect those as well. So emotions can play a big role, and they certainly do in our lives. The word emotion, a common saying for it is, that it's energy in motion, right? I don't know if that's actually the etymology of the word, but it's pretty accurate as a meaning, as a way to break it down. It's like emotions give this drive, and they do put our energy in motion, and so that affects us in our daily lives. It's also going to affect us and be relevant to our Qigong practice, because of course our Qigong practice is about working with energy, developing skill with energy. So those emotions, energy in motion, that's going to have a big effect on it. One of the things I often tell people in relationship to different practices that we do in Qigong is that all of our emotions are good emotions. There's not really such a thing as a bad emotion. Every emotion has its role, has its purpose in motivating us and moving us through life. Again, energy in motion. And so, because sometimes people have a tendency to think of some emotions as good and others as bad. So they think, oh, love's good, joy's good, anger, that's bad, fear, that's bad. It's not really the case. Fear can be really good sometimes. It'll keep you alive sometimes. That's not a bad thing. And anger will often motivate you to do something about something important. Yeah, that's not a bad thing either, often. But it depends on how we actually use that energy, right? Because we can interpret these emotions in different ways sometimes. That anger is very much the same as passion. It's a driving energy to do something about something you care about. You don't get angry about things you don't care about. Fear, the physiological response of fear, is very similar to that of excitement. And so, if you imagine a good analogy I sometimes use for this, if you imagine you are a base jumper, so that's someone who likes to jump off tall things with a parachute that they then release. well, actually, before that, if you imagine you're someone who's scared of heights, and you're on a tall building and you walk to the edge of it, you go like, like there's this reaction, there's release of adrenaline, there's activation through the nervous system, there's dilation of the pupils, all this sort of thing. That's fear. You're like, oh, you're scared of that, right? But you flip that over, someone who's a base jumper, someone who likes to jump off tall buildings with a parachute, they go to the edge of that building and they go, oh! It's the same physiological response, release of adrenaline, activation of the nervous system, dilation of the pupils. But for them, it's not fear, it's excitement. Yeah, and so we can interpret our emotions in different ways, and that will affect how we channel them in healthy and useful ways. So all of our emotions are healthy, they're all good. The issue arises when they are too strong. That can cause harm. It's energy that is moving too strongly, and maybe it can damage some things or push things out of place or shape. Yeah, too strong, too intense. That can cause us harm. Or if they get stuck, if instead of being energy in motion, they are energy that is blocked, and then this builds tension and stagnant energy within us, and that causes problems as well. What we really want with our emotions is to be able to experience them in a healthy, balanced way, experience them fully, and then let them move through, process them. And then that leaves us open to experiencing new things in our lives, new aspects, different emotions. If we get stuck on one emotion, that then blocks us from experiencing other things more fully. So there can be, while all our emotions are healthy, there can be problems where the way we're experiencing the energy from emotions can become unhealthy. And so that's really the topic of this vlog. How should we approach our Qigong practice when we are experiencing an emotion that's very strong? And again, maybe we're very upset and so on. So it's very strong, and it's to the point where it's like, okay, maybe this isn't actually a healthy expression of that emotion for us. What should we do in our Qigong practice? It's interesting because I've heard different Qigong teachers talk about emotions in different ways. As I've just expressed, my approach is, I think the healthy thing is to embrace our emotions, accept them as part of life. It's what gives the color, the energy, the motivation in life. You know, a life without emotion, I don't think would be much of a life. But I've heard other Qigong teachers take quite a different view, to the point of saying that emotions are neurotoxins. It's like, wow, that's pretty extreme. Emotions are neurotoxins. And I think, again, when you encounter these different points of view, it's not necessarily that they're wrong. They might be wrong in the extreme of the way, or the absolute way that they've stated it, but there can be an essence of truth to it as well. Like there's something to it. It's not that they're completely wrong. It's just like, okay, that's maybe a bit more absolute than is healthy or helpful. And when we have very, very strong emotions, yeah, that's where they can become toxic to us, and maybe even neurotoxins, but certainly cause damage elsewhere in our body as well. So what do we do about this in our Qigong practice? This is somewhere where yeah, there is actually some caution or some modification required sometimes to our Qigong practice, because this strong energy, and if it's a bit out of control, like it's got to the point where it's, okay, this isn't healthy, if we then practice a Qigong practice which simply circulates that energy, or even focuses on storing that potentially disturbed energy, we can then reinforce the potentially negative effects of that strong emotion. So that's not something we want to do. And this is something that's helpful to understand and be aware of, that when we have those strong emotions, simply doing a Qigong practice that is just circulating energy or storing, or particularly storing it, it's not a good idea, because that can then, that can reinforce an unhealthy habit and cause more damage. But at the same time, Qigong is this really useful tool for working with energy, for getting it to move smoothly. So there are ways we can use our Qigong practice even when we are upset, but in a slightly different way. And we can choose an appropriate practice that will help us to bring that energy from the emotions back into balance, back into a more harmonious flow, before we then focus on things like simply circulating or simply, storing that energy, building it up inside us. And so there are some Qigong practices that focus very much, instead of just circulating or storing the energy, they focus very much on either releasing, expelling energy, discharging it, or converting, changing the quality of energy to make it more harmonious. And if we're really, really upset, these are the types of Qigong practices that we should focus on. Ones that release and discharge. So, we've got some energy that's too strong, maybe it's stagnant, maybe it's blocked, whatever it is. Get that out, clear that, just expel it, release it out, so that then we can have a healthier flow of energy because it's expelled. Or alternatively, if we have some of the energy, it's a bit strong, it's a bit out of control, again, maybe it's even getting stuck. If we do a practice that focuses on transforming that energy, and again, this ties into maybe some of what I said earlier about, well, anger and passion, they're basically the same thing. Fear and excitement, basically the same thing. When we work with those to transform them to, basically the same thing, but changing some of the qualities of that energy, often that will then allow it to become free and then to move more freely, to circulate, to be released, or to move in a healthy way through the system and bring things back into balance. So there's a range of different practices that work in this way. Some of them involve physical movements that are really helpful for discharging, releasing energy. There are some specific breathing practices that are really useful for expelling energy held within the organs, basically, but clearing that out to allow fresh energy to flow in, clearing strong energy out. And then some practices that are really, really useful use sound. And we use sound as a way to vibrate and loosen energy that relates to emotions inside our organs, to vibrate and loosen that, which will then tend to naturally help to convert it from maybe a form that is not so pleasant to us into a more pleasant, harmonious form, and then allow it to move through. And so if we focus on these practices first, we can then bring ourselves to enough of a state of balance and harmony, having cleared blocked, strong, stagnant energy or converted it so it starts to harmonize and flow freely, that we can then move into other practices that can be useful for us in just, balancing our whole system, circulating the energy, storing it, and so on. But that's really what we want to focus on first if we have those strong emotions, so that it doesn't cause us any problems. Now, when I say that, it really is strong emotions that we need to have that extra caution with. If you're just like a little bit mildly annoyed, something like that, a little bit stressed, something like that, you can generally move into more general types of Qigong practice and just allow the gentle harmonization that occurs as part of that practice to bring things back into balance by themselves. But if those emotions are really strong, we don't just want to circulate them. We certainly don't want to focus on storing them up. We need to do something to release them first, or to convert them, to create harmony, and then we can move into more general practice. All right, hopefully that's a useful one, interesting one. I look forward to seeing you on another vlog soon.